Hi there. In my last video when I made the conrod, I made a slight error when I was drilling, I suppose what you might call it, the big end. And I'll show you what I mean. So when I machined the conrod and drilled and reamed the big end, I didn't realise at the time that the hole needed to be reamed to 3/8 of an inch. I actually reamed it to 1/4 of an inch because I didn't realise at the time that it takes a bush with an outside diameter of 3/8 of an inch and the inside diameter of the bush is 1/4 of an inch. But anyway, I just re-drilled it and it seems to have worked out very well. I also made this pin off camera. That goes in like that. It goes like that. I'm really happy with the outcome. Perfect. Anyway, in this video I'm going to machine the beam. Well, the beam should be a relatively easy casting to machine, and it needs tidying up round the edges, and then it needs to be brought to the correct thickness, and then once these edges are tidied up it needs to be drilled and reamed. So these three need to be drilled and reamed to 1/8 of an inch, and I think the centre one is drilled and reamed to 1/2 an inch in diameter. So what I'll do off camera is I'll just tidy up the edges and then get it onto the mill. So the sides have cleaned up quite nice using a combination of hand filing and some wet and dry. Now the actual width of this beam should be 3/8 of an inch, and in places it's already under that, just slightly. So what I've decided to do is just to mill 5 thou off each side. Now there was a mark on the casting that denoted the position of this hole here. So what I decided to do was just to centre drill that mark, because I don't want to mill it off and then lose it. Because I did actually use the caliper just to check the dimensions from that mark to the centre and to the end, and they are to the drawing. So 3.5 inches up to here puts you dead in the centre of this boss. You can see we're not even touching it there. So I'll continue around this edge here, and I think what I'm going to have to do is just to tidy this edge up with a hand file, because I don't want to mill too much off. So I'll continue, but I'll do it all off camera. Well, that was quite difficult, to be honest. I've ended up with these bosses about 20 thou undersize, and hopefully that won't present a problem when I come to build it. If it does, I'm going to have to maybe put some wider bushes in here, but fingers crossed we'll be okay. Now the central boss needs to be machined down to 1/2 inch between each side, and it's currently about 70 thou over size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp it and then take 35 thou off this side, turn it round and take 35 thou off the other side. And you can also see here that even though I've machined quite a lot off, there's still some bits here in the centre that haven't been machined, so I might actually just touch those off with a file. So now I just need to turn it over and do the other side. Okay, so the distance between this hole here and this hole here is 7 inches. So to line the piece up, all I've basically done is I've centred on the pre-drilled hole that I did earlier, and then moved the x-axis 7 inches. And I've just adjusted the piece until the centre drill's spot on in the middle of that sort of boss. So I'm happy now that the piece is right. So what I'll do now is I'll centre drill and then drill with 1/8 inch. Then I'll drill that hole there, which is, let me see, 1 3/4 inch away from this hole. Then I'll go over here and drill the first hole, 3mm drill bit, and then I'll go back to this one which is in the centre. Now that needs to be drilled and ringed to 1/2 inch, so I'll use various size drill bits until I get up to, let me see, 31/64, and then I'll ream. Now the 1/8 inch holes, which I'm going to drill to 3mm, I'm going to hand ream those off the mill. and just hand reaming to 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so now I need to drill the oil hole, which is 3/32 of an inch in diameter. So I used an edge finder to find this edge, and then I zeroised the y-axis D arrow. Then I found this edge to give me the distance. I divided it by 2, which gave me the centre point. And what I also did was I just eyeballed that the drill is on the centre of the hole, this big hole that I've just drilled. This big hole is slightly out in relation to the casting, but I'm going to tidy that up with the mill on the rotary table. But what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to make the beam pivot supports which fit in here. Once I've made those beam pivot supports, I will then mill to those dimensions. Okay, so the beam pivot supports are made out of this piece of brass, and most of the machining will be carried out on the lathe, apart from the drilling and tapping of these 4BA threads. So I face this end off, and the drawing suggests that I need to reduce this down to 3/16 of an inch in diameter for a length of 3/8 of an inch. So I've put a stop on the carriage, so I can't move the carriage beyond 3/8 of an inch. Now I reckon 3/16 of an inch diameter is 4.76 millimeters, but my tables suggest that to cut a 2BA thread it needs to be 4.7 millimeters, so I'm going to reduce it to 4.7 millimeters. So using a parting tool, I've roughly marked out where the main features are going to be. It'll be parted off there, and the edges here, it needs to have sort of a U profile. So what I've decided to do is use this little round tool first of all to plunge it into a depth of 3 millimeters. That will define the bottom of this U, and then I'm going to use this tool to even the sides out. So now I'm going to try and tidy up the sides of this U shape. getting close. That seems to have turned out okay. So I just need to put the thread on, but I'll do that off camera and part it off. And now it's just a matter of tapping the 4BA thread. Well, that's turned out pretty well. So what I need to do is to make a similar one, but obviously that's got an internal thread. But I'll do all that off camera because the process is very, very similar. Now, when machining this bit, I thought I should check the dimension for a good fit. So what I've done is I've obviously made sure that the diameter fits nicely, which it does, but also the width of it. I just want to make sure that there's just a little bit of play on each side once this is screwed in. That's just about perfect. Very little side movement, but it moves freely. So I'm really happy with that. Well, that seems to have worked out very well. What I've done is I've just nipped these up and they rotate nice and freely. And I've done that because what I wanted to do is just to mark up the position of the hole I need to drill and tap for the 4BA. I need it to be at the same position as that one. So I've just put a bit of a felt tip mark on that. I'll go over to the mill and I'll just drill and tap. But I'll do all that off camera. Well, off camera I made a couple of these links and they fit into there like that. And now I need to put a taper on. And I was wondering how to go about that. So what I decided to do was to make a couple of pieces out of some bar. So I've threaded the ends, which thread onto here, and I've centred. So hopefully I can put that on the lathe between centres and turn the taper. Okay, so when I made the taper in my last video, I got a lot of useful feedback, and what I've decided to do this time is use my boring head. And I'm taking the advice of Roger, who suggested getting a 10mm straight shank multi-live centre from Arc. So I have done, and I've made a little sleeve here because the hole in my boring head is 12mm and not 10mm. Now the width of this little link is around about 0.311 of an inch, and I need to be aiming at the end for about 0.211. So that's 100 thou in total. So I need to be aiming for a difference of 50 thou. So I'm on 0 at the moment. 10, 20, 30, 40. Takes me up to 50. If I go the other way, I go up to 50 as well. So I'm quite happy that it's all set up correctly. So I'll crack on and start doing the taper. Well, I ended up using the fine feed on the carriage for each of the cuts, and it looks okay. And I ended up cutting 60 thou off. So I think that looks alright, so I'll switch it round and do the other side. Well, that seems to have worked out okay. So I'll clean it up with some wet and dry off camera, and then I'll machine the other one again off camera. Well, that seems to have worked out okay. Now what I was going to do was to make a couple of crossheads which go on the ends here. But I'm not really happy. It's mild steel and I think it'll look better in brass. So I've just sent off for some brass and I'll make those off camera. But it's starting to look good. Well, I'm getting really close to finishing this little engine now, and the main item outstanding is the eccentrics, which I'll cover in my next video. There are a few other bits and pieces to make, but they're fairly insignificant, no major components, so I think I'll concentrate on making those off camera between now and the next video. But anyway, I hope you like the results so far, and I hope to see you later.